All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to my live stream. I started nearly 15 minutes ago, but something was going on with my computer and something was going on with the software loaded to my computer, and it started to reboot on its own. So I don't know if it's the content, I don't know if it's the deep state that's monitoring the chat waves across America, across the world, but we're going to try again. And I'm Gregory Wright. Welcome back to the Gregory Wright Show. Today we're going to talk about the recent fraud discovery in the state of Minnesota. $1 billion went missing. $1 billion over a course of 3, 4 years in COVID funding has disappeared into the pockets of Somalis that live in Minneapolis who got caught up in this ring. And I believe that the investigation is ongoing, and there will be more people that are captured, indicted, convicted, jail, and in prison. So the media is in a frenzy right now because the one of the key voting blocks for the Democratic Party are Somalis who live in Minneapolis. If you can't win Minneapolis, then you can't win Minnesota. If you can't win Minnesota, then you anybody coming out of Minnesota aspiring to be the president of the United States is probably not going to happen, right? Because um, the Somali community plays a huge role in Minnesota, and so Tim Walz is in deep doo doo, as my thumbnail suggests, because he was the governor, he still is the governor, who is supposed to monitor every penny in taxpayer revenue that comes in to his coffers in order to pay the bills for the state, for the citizens who are legally living there. But instead, it seems like allegedly that he's turned a blind eye to the corruption that started since 2019. And it ended 6 years later, September, October of this year. Reports allege that Tim Walz knew about this corruption, but turned a blind eye to it because he did not want to offend his party's key voting bloc in Minneapolis, thus Minnesota. The narrative that Tim Walz and people who support him, like the mainstream media, who is the media arm of the Democratic Party, they spin the narrative to make it seem like President Trump's comments about Somalis, not all of them, I'm hoping, but some of them, especially those who were caught up in this fraud ring to the tune of $1 billion. They're trying to really focus on some of the things that Trump has said over the last 24, 48 hours. Like, Somalia is a shithole. Um, it's a failing country. It's not really even a country. It's just people walking around killing each other. Um, all Somalis, or a good number of Somalis that live in Minneapolis and other places in Minnesota, all they do whine, bitch, and complain about how bad America is, but yet they're still living here. And Somalia is a worse country than the United States ever was. And another reason why I want to make this video is because the mainstream media is not focusing on the fraud aspect of this story. The scandal has become a flashpoint in national politics. President Trump has labeled Minnesota a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity, right? Let's really get to the nuts and bolts of what I'm talking about here. The $1 billion fraud in Minnesota refers to a series of interconnected schemes that have defrauded over $1 billion with a B in taxpayer funds from various state and federal social services programs, marking it as the largest COVID-19 related fraud case in the United States. These scams primarily exploited relaxed oversight during the pandemic and targeted Minnesota's generous safety net systems, with fraudsters setting up sham companies to bill for non existent services. The total stolen amount across at least three major plots exceeds $1 billion with a B, surpassing the state's annual Department of Corrections budget. Federal prosecutors have charged around 78 individuals, leading to nearly 60 convictions so far, with ongoing investigation. So this is pretty serious. And so if the other side of the aisle is claiming that this is a sham, this is a fraud, there's no way that you're going to get 60 convictions out of 78 charges if this wasn't serious. Okay. The key sham programs involved were child nutrition programs, which not a dime went to, housing stabilization services, which not a dime went to, and autism services and Medicaid, which a dime never went to. The dimes basically went to some of the Somalians that live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was caught up in this ring, some who haven't been caught yet. Millions and millions and millions of dollars, Minnesota taxpayer money went to Somalis that live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that is the truth. That is the fact. Okay? You could deny it, you can turn a blind eye to it, but that is the truth. There's no spin here. Let's take a look at some of the timeline. So this thing spanned basically from 2019 to around September, October 2025, when Governor Walz paused the Medicaid payments and terminated the housing program. But that was only one of three. Okay, so that was two of three programs that he canceled September, October this year. However, I the report never said that the child nutrition program was canceled. So that may still be going on, and fraud may still be going on. Um, so the mainstream media is going to spin this
I don't
into
want them in our country.
the mainstream media is going to spin this into some Trump the Rain syndrome. The president hates Somalis. No, the president is not racist. Now we've had this discussion before, and I'm tired of that narrative. President Trump is not racist. However, when groups of people, no matter who you are, do the wrong thing, especially stealing $1 billion of taxpayer dollars to support a terrorist group, Al Shabaab in Somalia, that's where some of the fraud money went, to support that terrorist group. As a president, I would be frustrated about that. And I would probably say things that aren't presidential. But you got to take a look at the context, though. You have key top Democrats covering for Tim Walz. You have congressmen calling Trump a racist from the Democratic Party. And all President Trump is doing is showing his frustration about American people getting robbed by foreigners. And so I say that let's round up everybody that's involved with this, including Tim Walz, if we can prove it, allegedly, and let's send them to prison. Let's give them some prison time. And then when it comes to the Somalis that perpetrated this fraud, let's let's send these guys back to Somalia where they came from. That way, they can't complain about the United States. They can't complain about anything that the president is doing because they're going to be at home dealing with their own problems in Somalia. It's plain and simple. Plain and simple, guys.
Well, some wordplay in the title of a scathing opinion piece. Minnesota is becoming the land of 10,000 frauds. A play on, the land of lakes. Jason Chaffetz is coming up in focus. First, let's go to Garrett Tenney with more on this.
Yeah, Harris, we are already seeing ICE ramping up its efforts in the Twin Cities, with federal agents focusing on Somali individuals who are in the country illegally. But the Trump administration is also looking at ending temporary protected status, TPS, for a long list of countries, including Somalia, that's allowed folks to live and work in the U.S. These moves come after those massive fraud schemes in Minnesota, where dozens of folks, almost exclusively from the Somali community, stole more than $1 billion taxpayer dollars by fraudulently billing several state social service programs. At yesterday's cabinet meeting, President Trump said he wants Somalis to leave.
I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country.
Minnesota is home to the largest group of Somali refugees in the world, close to 80,000 people. Most of them have become U.S. citizens, according to the Census Bureau, and over the past few decades, they have become a political power bloc in the state, especially for Democrats. So yesterday, local officials lined up to blast the president over his latest comments.
To, again, villainize an entire group is ridiculous under any circumstances. And the way that Donald Trump is consistently doing it, I think, calls into question major constitutional violations. And it certainly violates the moral fabric of what we stand by in this country as Americans.
So far, more than 50 people have been convicted in that massive fraud scheme. 78 others are charged, and we are told that this investigation very much ongoing, and that what we've seen so far could be just the tip of the iceberg. Harris?
All right, Matt, great reporting. Thank you for getting us started. Fox News contributor Liz Peek has written a new opinion piece. Quote, why didn't the Minnesota authorities crack down sooner on the blatant theft? Reportedly, they were afraid of offending the Somali community, which constitutes a solid voting bloc for Walz and his Democrat colleagues. At one local politician put it this way, if you don't win the Somali community, you can't win Minneapolis. And if you don't win Minneapolis, you cannot win the state. End of story. All of that a quote. Minnesota Democrats driving that point home.
Obviously, everyone knows that our president is racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, and we are going to fight that. America has a history of fighting and stopping those kind of individuals who continue to divide people and divide communities.
Jason Chaffetz now, a Fox News contributor and former Republican.
So what the hell that dark-skinned guy that just got off saying, oh, he's a racist, he's xenophobic. It just sounds like Democrat political talking point. Somebody handed him a sheet of paper and said, yo, when you do that news conference today, remember these lines. And he said it verbatim. verbatim. And what the hell does that have to do with $1 billion stolen from Minnesotan taxpayers who live there legally? What does that have to do with anything? Like, it's so like I said, they doing a switcheroo, man. And we have to be smarter than that. We have to focus on the story. The story is that there were some Somalis that created a scheme to steal money from U.S. taxpayers to send back to Somalia to Al Shabaab, a terrorist organization that terrorizes people in the region and especially in that country. And then the Somalis that live, not all of them, but a good number of them benefited, they pocketed a good portion of that $1 billion that was stolen from the American people. Now, anything outside of that discussion is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. So just keep your eye on the ball, folks.
Congressman of Utah. First of all, let's talk about the fraud allegations. And having lived in Minnesota and both in Minneapolis and St. Paul and there, the Twin Cities, let's talk about that community. But first, the fraud, your reaction.
That's a lot of money. You can't just go hide $1 billion. Like, these people have, they've earned it. And Donald Trump is right. That last person to make the comment about dividing communities and all that, you know what? President Trump is pro-America. It is anti-American to actually rip off the American taxpayers. We're the most generous country on the face of the planet. Minnesotans that I know even have relatives who live there. They're very generous. But there's nothing like coming in, ripping off your community, stealing it from the people who actually do need these goods. And Liz Peek wrote a great column. She talked about they had budgeted like $2 million for certain reimbursements, but now that number is over $120 million. And it ends up that, hey, it happens to be these Somalians that are accused of ripping off the system and then sending it to a terrorist organization to go kill people overseas.
Wow. Just real quickly, because I covered some of these cases when I lived there. Minnesota for years, certainly after 2007, 2010, with a growing population from East Africa, particularly Somalia, Minnesota struggled for years to stem the recruiting of some young Somali men by the Islamic State group and the Somali-based militant group Al-Shabaab. Now, we knew that that was happening. We had more than a dozen of those young men indicted and caught up in a trial and all of that not many years ago. And then just this past September, they had another case, a 23-year-old defendant who pleaded guilty of providing material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization. Look, Minnesota has a problem. The president is targeting them because they apparently, at least some in their community, uncalled, don't really want to assimilate.
Look, if you're here legally and lawfully and you're not committing crimes, you got nothing to worry about. But if you're here illegally and you are committing crimes and you are supporting a terrorist organization, these terrorists, the Al-Shabaab, their ties to Al-Qaeda, and what they've been doing to kill people around the world in Kenya and other countries. You look at the pirating that's going off the coast of.
Right, so I just want to stop the video real quick and just let you know what organizations, fraudulent organizations that were set up to suck tax money from U.S. taxpayers to go to nothing other than Somali pockets and Al-Shabaab terrorist group in Somalia, feeding our future. What's that? Housing Stabilization Services, the Department of Human Services, Smart Therapy Center. I guess that's for illnesses and diseases and children and the elderly, right? How they did it? Deceptive enrollment in medical programs, fake meal counts, fake records and invoices, fraudulent autism diagnosis. This is the extent of the fraud, people. There are three things that I would like for you to do for me that's free. I would like you to like, share, and subscribe this video. And it's not going to cost you anything, obviously. But what it's going to do, it's going to spread my message. It's going to prompt the YouTube algorithm to spread my message to a much wider audience. People who wouldn't otherwise come across my video would come across my video, and by chance taps the video because they're curious, and they watch it in its entirety, and you get all the information that the mainstream media refuses to post.
Of Africa there, or it's unbelievable how bad they've been. And they were designated a foreign terrorist organization back in 2008. And so if you have the funding that's happening by ripping off the people in Minnesota and the American people and their taxpayer dollars, I applaud. I want Secretary Noem, I want the President of the United States to go in there, root it out. ICE is going to do the difficult thing, but you know what? You're here illegally. You got to go home. You've got to be detained. You have to be deported. All of them. You're here illegally. You're all gone.
So why would a Minnesota governor get involved in this? What are the politics? Let's dig into that. A new opinion piece now has this headline: voters were right to reject Tim Walz in 2024. And here's part of it, quote, Walz is wildly incompetent as both a politician, as a governing executive as well. He is a hypocrite who gives lectures on morality one moment and cheers the possible death of his political opponents the next. In all, Walz is one of the worst people in our politics, someone who would run both the government and our political culture further into the ground, end quote. Your reaction?
When I was in Congress, in the House gym, his locker was right next to mine. Nice guy, but he's an idiot. And he's had his chance, and you know what? He's absolutely blown it. He's shown that his political colors are all about protecting his backside rather than doing what's right for America, right for Minnesota, and doing what he's supposed to be doing. He is so wrong. Between him and the Attorney General, who doesn't get enough credit for being an idiot as well, Keith Ellison, who served with us in the United States House of Representatives, they are a 1-2 punch there in Minnesota that is destroying that state. And Donald Trump's going to help save that state. And I think the majority of Minnesotans are going to applaud him for cleaning up this fraudulent mess that they've created.
Yeah, look, if anybody wants to do their homework on what they're dealing with, and I say the word some, not all, within the Somali community that are being looked at now, especially those here illegally, they can go to PBS, because that's the report I was quoting from. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's fact. All right. Let's do this. A survey by the right-leaning Media Research Center shows that over the past week, broadcast network nightly news almost completely.
This is the reason, and this was as of yesterday. I'm going to disappear from the screen real quick so you can see the whole thing. This is as of last night, or, early yesterday, right? Because this had to have been somewhere around noontime or whatever, because I'm looking at the bottom right, and it says Trump makes announcement 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So this broadcast was at least before 2:30, right? So it could have been 2 o'clock, could have been 1:30, I don't know. But the point is that nightly news coverage of Minnesota fraud scandal received 0 time on ABC, 0 time on CBS, and less than a minute on Nobody Cares, right? NBC. This is the reason why I'm making this video. And I said that at the front, at the start. You didn't have to wait 24 minutes to recognize that, right?
Ignored this massive fraud story. ABC and CBS didn't cover it. I mean, it's fact. All right, let's do this. A survey by the right-leaning Media Research Center shows that over the past week, broadcast network nightly news almost completely ignored this massive fraud story. ABC and CBS didn't cover it at all, not even a second. NBC spent less than 60 seconds on it. Now, I know you're not shocked by this, but I thought Democrats cared about COVID money and helping people out. Like, you would think that the mass part of this fraud, they would care about.
That's the part of the story that I don't understand from the media and from the Democrats. They believe, you hear Zohran Mamdani and others talk about, hey, we need more government, more resources because there's no problem in your life, small or big, that government can't solve. But when you steal the money from government, guess what? The recipients of those who actually need it, they're the ones that are harmed the most. And that's part of the story they never, ever tell because they want to perpetuate this myth that big government, more government is infallible and that we need more money, that the cupboards are bare. I would always hear Nancy Pelosi say, the cupboards are bare. We have to spend more. We're spending $4 trillion plus and they still can't get it done. And then to have it ripped off by $1 billion. That's a massive amount of money, Harris.
Jason Chaffetz, great to start off the show with you in focus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here is the Minnesota fraud scandal as we understand it right now. A lot of companies and organizations were tapping into this, like Feeding Our Future, the Department.
Cupboards are bare. I would always hear Nancy Pelosi say, the cupboards.
It's great to start off the show with you in focus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, what we're about to get into, because this segment is a recapitulation of all the news that occurred up to this point yesterday, and it stays on topic about the $1 billion Somali fraud in Minnesota and how Tim Walz is responsible for that, and he should be investigated because it's alleged that he knew about it and he didn't do anything about it. And then when whistleblowers from his state, from his cabinet, came to him to let him know, hey, there's this type of fraud going on, he reassigned him. He retaliated against his own state employees. He did things to those employees that Tim Walz is accusing Trump of doing. Look, true or not, it's up to the investigation, and we'll see the results of the investigation if it happens and if it's released to the public in a timely manner. But this next clip that you're about to come, I think, is the best summary of what went on in Minnesota as far as the $1 billion fraud.
Here is the Minnesota fraud scandal as we understand it right now. A lot of companies and organizations were tapping into this, like Feeding Our Future, the Department of Human Services in Minnesota, Smart Therapy Center, whatever that is. There are more, just three that we wanted to point out here. Here's how they did it. Deceptive enrollment and Medicare programs. This is how it works. Fake meal counts, which means fake number of people, fake records and invoices, fraudulent autism diagnosis. That's how they work this system now. How much they stole, we believe at the moment it's more than $1 billion. Maybe that number goes higher. Tom Emmer's with me now, congressman from Minnesota, who's been quite critical so far. And, sir, thank you for your time. I heard you on the air in an interview the other day. I want you to listen to your governor, Tim Walz, respond to the allegation. He says it's no coincidence that the buzzards are circling in his state. Watch here.
If you live in a Virginia zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years, listen carefully.
My message is simple on this. You commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to prison. I don't care what color you are, what religion you are. Anybody who wants to help us in that, we welcome that. But sitting on the sidelines and throwing out accusations, and let's be very clear, demonizing an entire population and lying to people about the safety and security of this state is beneath that.
That was his comment yesterday. What's your comment today, sir?
Well, calling out a criminal activity bill is not racist, and it's not unfair. Look, this guy is pathetic. He is incompetent. He's a pathological, sociopathic liar. He lies about everything. Got caught on national TV, Bill, lying about something as dumb as when he was at Tiananmen Square. And his response to that back then was, you know, I grew up in a small town. Sometimes I'm a bit of a knucklehead. Look, my hat is off to President Donald J. Trump. We have been trying to sound the alarm on this fraud that has been going on since the beginning of the Walz administration for more than 3 years. And it wasn't until Donald Trump sent his truth out a couple weeks ago that everybody started paying attention. You have correctly pointed out, it's already more than $1 billion that these fraudsters stole from Minnesota taxpayers under Tim Walz' watch, and the number is growing. It's not just the $250 million fraud case, the largest pandemic fraud case in the country that's feeding our future. It's Medicaid housing fraud. You go back, it's autism centers, the list goes on and on, daycare fraud. But let's just look at the housing one. The Medicaid housing program was created back in 2020. They estimated it was going to cost annually about $2 million. You know what? From 2020 to 2024, it was $100 million. And they shut the program down in October of 2025 because from the beginning of the year, they'd already sucked out $61 million. And this idea that it's not going to al-Shabaab, they're sending the money back to Somalia, Bill. Yeah. People should understand, al-Shabaab controls the financial infrastructure in Somalia. It is going back to Somalia where al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization, is in charge.
Okay, so at the moment, I just want to read this from a federal prosecutor. His name is Joe Thompson. I don't know if you know him or not.
I do.
All right, so he made this comment at the end of July, all right? This fraud crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of widespread failure across nearly every level of leadership in Minnesota. Politicians who turned a blind eye, agencies that failed to act, prosecutors and law enforcement who didn't push hard enough. This isn't just a few criminals exploiting the system. This is a system that's been begging to be exploited. Sir.
Amen. Joe Thompson also said the level of fraud that he has found in just his investigation is, it takes your breath away. Here's the big issue. What I want to know as a Minnesotan, you've got $1 billion that went out under the Walz administration. By the way, he went on national TV saying, I take responsibility for prosecuting fraudsters. Tim Walz has done nothing. Tim Walz has not held one person in his administration accountable for $1 billion of fraud. And my question now is, this isn't just negligent incompetence, Bill. Somebody is complicit in this. And if the governor, there are whistleblowers, alleged whistleblowers out there that are claiming that they let the governor know and that he not only...
Look, Tim Walz is complicit in this $1 billion Minnesota fraud. I'm going to be the first to come out and say it. All right? Because look, I believe my ears, I believe my eyes, and until somebody comes along and proves otherwise, Tim Walz knew about this, man, for real.
Ignored them.
It's my opinion.
Actually retaliated against them. If that's true, Bill, there probably should be an investigation into criminal charges. This governor, the attorney general, it stinks to high heaven.
He just thinks the government's picking on him, but we'll see where it goes. $1 billion sounds like it's a lot more than just picking. Sir, thank you for coming on. It is your home state in the spotlight.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says he's open to the Treasury Department's investigation after millions of taxpayer dollars reportedly made its way to a terrorist group in Somalia.
When the President of the United States sets up and tweets 150 times after midnight and targets certain people, it's not a coincidence that they're targeting Minnesota. If they want to help us, I welcome that. I think they do an investigation, find out, but I don't think anybody in here really believes their motive and their timing is about actually doing something about this.
The failed VP candidate is questioning the Trump administration's movements, but members of Congress say this is all about protecting Americans and their money. The House Oversight Committee, which is also investigating, says Walz was warned about massive fraud in a pandemic food aid program for children, yet failed to act. So far, at least 50 people have been convicted in the massive fraud scheme, with nearly 80 others getting charged. Minneapolis leadership claims this is a massive case of government overreach.
Targeting Somali people means that due process will be violated. Mistakes will be made. We need to also be demanding better from an administration who is intent on targeting people and committing so much time, energy, and money to terrorizing.
Yo, this guy is a fucking simp, right? He reminds me of Gavin Newsom. And no, this video is not made for children. So we're all adults here. And so if I can't curse on YouTube where you show movies where people curse, you rent movies on your platforms where actors curse. As a content creator, I'm not on Hollywood, but the same as an actor, they create content to show on a silver screen. I create content to show on the black screen. And so this guy, Jacob Frey, mayor of Minneapolis, had to have known about this, because why else would he be talking about other things on the periphery? He's talking about targeting Somalians. Nah, this is not what this is about. This video is not what this is about. What this is about is how Somalis got caught stealing taxpayer money from U.S. citizens. And then some of that money, millions and millions, went to Al-Shabaab, a terrorist organization in Somalia. And then the rest of it went in the pockets of Somalis and maybe other people outside the Somali community. Come on, man. Trump is just frustrated that you, as an American, Mr. Jacob Frey, would rather stand up for criminals and maybe get some kickbacks on your own, allegedly, right? We'll see what the results of the investigation say. But from the outside looking in, all I see is a person that's defending crime. That is the go-to for Democrats these days. It is a crime, and things are coming out, and the president is expressing his frustration, as he should, and as all Americans should, from having something stolen from you. Have you ever had anything stolen from you of value, sentimental value, monetary value? Have you? Because if you haven't, then you don't know how it feels to have something missing that you cherish so much. He's talking about violating due process. The American people who got their tax money stolen didn't have no due process before all that money was fucking used for things that didn't benefit American citizens. What are you talking about, that going due process? This motherfucker is a clown. He's a clown. Talking about some due process because Americans are expressing their damn frustration over having their taxpayer dollars stolen from them by foreigners.
Certain groups within our community. That's not American.
If there is anything that is, a violation of someone's human rights or civil rights, excessive force or anything like that, they absolutely have a duty to intervene as police officers.
We have got to the point where literally anybody can build a fully working app without knowing how to code. This is Base 44.
What are they talking about? I mean, that first speaker was Jacob Frey, the mayor. And let me just quote the New York Times. Let's clear this up. This is not some right-wing investigative story targeting Tim Walz. No, New York Times says it's staggering in its scale and brazenness. This story, it's been happening for 5 years, and they wasted up to $1 billion, this is New York Times, in taxpayer money. That is more than Minnesota spends annually to run its Department of Corrections. That's the New York Times. Tell that to Jacob Frey.
Look, they're lying to you. In short, since 2019, primarily when Tim Walz became governor, to now, Minnesota's government has become a pseudo-criminal run enterprise. Another set of numbers that matter: from 2019 to 2023, Minnesota's SNAP payments, $509 million in 2019, 174% rise from 2019 to 20. 2019 to 20, and 1.5 billion plus in 2023. What happened in Minnesota that required that much of an increase in outbound SNAP money alone from that program? The fact is, they didn't choose to ignore. They simply close their eyes to the waste, the fraud. A restaurant owner should not be stealing $250,000 in COVID funds, in one example, millions of dollars. Now we have the outbound money going to Al-Shabaab, going through the NGOs, going through these. When you're stealing money from children, Tim Walz, which is what your administration let happen, and it's going overseas to terrorists, don't blame Donald Trump.
Yep. There's something I'm quite confused about. 2022 is when Merrick Garland started charging in this case. 2022. That's a lot of years ago. But yet the media somehow didn't discover the story. And then we find, I'm going to answer my own question. Let's look at this. Now that this has been covered by the New York Times, 0 minutes of coverage on ABC, 0 minutes CBS, less than 1 minute NBC. Harris, this has been going on since 2022. Where is the investigative
So I worked for ABC News for years in the Twin Cities, and the start of that was really the start of when we would see East African nations like Somalia coming over. And they had very good social programs in Minnesota. And so that was a magnet for them. And they came, and many were beautiful families.
There was so much criticism of that just to keep people working, keep American citizens getting paid. All the while, the press was totally turning a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and the reason why a thorough investigation into this scandal is so important is because it's really a perfect case study of the many failures of progressive governance. You had mass migration without any assimilation at all. You had racialized politics that pressured people not to say anything about the lack of assimilation. And then you had bureaucratic mismanagement of taxpayer funds, and then the total drive of any real accountability from the people who mismanaged those funds in the first place. You don't see any sort of apology from Tim Walz. Hey, Minnesotans, I'm sorry for wasting $1 billion by letting the Somali community do this.
Yeah, and I'm going to replay her tape because I think she hit the nail on the head. Now, I've said other things about Tim Walz. I believe that Tim Walz is complicit due to his treatment of his own state employees, whistleblowers that let him know some years back that this fraud was going on. He did nothing about it. He reprimanded, and he basically showed retribution to his own state employees for letting them know that there's an error occurring. But Tim Walz, she's right. Tim Walz is not acknowledged. Well, in some cases he acknowledged the fraud, and he said, "Yeah, we're gonna do whatever we can to put them in jail, whatever, find them and put them in jail." Okay, word salad, right? He's only saying that because his ass is in the hot seat. So now, but you never heard an apology from him. He'll talk about Trump before he talk about his own constituents that are legally living in the state of Minnesota. I'm not talking about people on visas. Well, I guess I am talking about people on visas and stuff like that, but I'm talking about people who have the right to vote in this country, right? By being a citizen or some type of special status, right? I'm talking about those people. He didn't apologize to him because he doesn't care about his own people. This dude, he had local police shooting paintballs at his own residents that live in the state during the pandemic because they were standing on their own front porch getting fresh air. They were getting fresh air, standing on the front porch, and then the cops come along in Minnesota and shot them with paintballs. Now, I'm not going to get into that right now, but in terms of showing a video and all that, but this guy Tim Walz, I think there's something wrong with this guy. Let me replay this.
citizens getting paid. All the while, the press was totally turning a blind eye to this.
Yeah, and the reason why a thorough investigation into this scandal is so important is because it's really a perfect case study of the many failures of progressive governance. You had mass migration without any assimilation at all. You had racialized politics that pressured people not to say anything about the lack of assimilation. And then you had bureaucratic mismanagement of taxpayer funds, and then the total drive of any real accountability from the people who mismanaged those funds in the first place. You don't see any sort of apology from Tim Walz. Hey, Minnesotans, I'm sorry for wasting $1 billion by letting the Somali community do this. That is a major scandal. And, you know, it's not just Minnesota. And I will just say really quickly, to your point that this had been known for years, there is a group of state employees in Minnesota who said that they flagged this for Kamala Harris's campaign in the DNC when she tapped Tim Walz. And they said nothing about it. And there is a reason why Brooke Rollins yesterday in the cabinet meeting said that she's going after other blue states who are refusing to turn over SNAP data. It is because this is not just a Minnesota problem. This is a California problem. This is a New York problem. Our taxpayer funds are being exploited and abused, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
And, you know, at the heart of each of those states, Cheryl, is I was shocked to read this in the New York Times. The episode has raised broader questions for some residents about the sustainability of Minnesota's Scandinavian-modeled system of robust safety net programs sustained by high taxes.
No.
Yeah, bingo.
You want to bankrupt the city of Minneapolis? You know, go right ahead. But look, this is the tip of the iceberg, guys, on this investigation. I have a well-placed source that told me that the fraud is everywhere. It does point back to the Somali community, to be clear here, because of the al-Shabaab connections. But we're talking about Michigan. It's happening up in Canada. The same fraud schemes are going on in Canada. To your point about the Minnesota Department of Human Service employees, yes, they warned the Harris.
So I must say that I am very pleased at the job that Donald Trump, or President Trump, is doing in his second term. For the past 11 months, yes, we experienced 43 days of a government shutdown. It did slow down the economy somewhat. It did dampen aspirations for young people to expand their family network, if you know what I mean. And so now we're talking about the fact that this $1 billion scam is a Somali problem, and there's no getting away from it. That's what this investigation is turning up so far, and it spans 6 years. And what I'm talking about is you have to understand that Americans are going to be outraged. Plain and simple. They are of Somali descent, and there's nothing that you can do or say that is going to change that.
I'll go right ahead. But look, this is the tip of the iceberg, guys, on this investigation. I have a well-placed source that told me that the fraud is everywhere. It does point back to the Somali community, to be clear here, because of the al-Shabaab connections. But we're talking about Michigan. It's happening up in Canada. The same fraud schemes are going on in Canada. To your point about the Minnesota Department of Human Service employees, yes, they warned the Harris campaign, but they also warned Tim Walz specifically, and they were gaslit. They were ignored. They've been very vocal about it. And I don't know. Thank you, the New York Times, for finally catching up to what everybody else already knows. But to your point about the politics, you know, Walz is running for governor again.
That's right.
So he has every reason to get in front of the cameras right now and decry all of this. Right. Because he needs the money. If you don't have the Somali community, as you know, Harris, if you don't have them behind you, you don't get elected.
You can't win in the Twin Cities. You can't win the state. And look, Senator Tom Emmer, Republican running up there, yeah, he's got plenty to say right now. So Walz had better speak up. Otherwise, he won't be in that race.
Oh, to be a Democrat, you can take taxpayer money intended for children, get it to terrorist groups unwittingly, and then have an aiding and abetting press corps. Like, wow, That's how this country works.
Yeah, like any iceberg, there's a whole lot below the surface. So let's bring in the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, for more on this. Mr. Chairman, good to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time today. I just want to put up on the screen here some facts and figures so folks at home can truly understand the depth of the fraud here. This was in the Minnesota Housing Stabilization Program. The predicted cost was $2.6 million annually. You can see the actual costs there.
And their Somali community as ICE is zeroing in on the Twin Cities.
They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you. Somebody say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country is no good for a reason. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. But when they come from hell and they complain and do nothing but, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
You know, I'm sure there are very honorable, law-abiding, upstanding citizens and contributors from the Somali community here in the United States. But that doesn't mean we can't use our judgment, our wisdom, in analyzing the various contributions of communities and cultures. We're not going to pretend here that all cultures are of equal value or are the same. No one really believes that. No one makes individual choices on a day-to-day basis that reveals they think all cultures are the same, where they choose to live, what they choose to eat, who they choose to socialize with. It's mostly a virtue signal, and that's what you get from most politicians when it comes to this very serious conversation that needs to be had about our culture here in America. You normally get from politicians just pandering, just nonsense, just stuff like this from Minnesota's mayor.
This is heavy. It's warm, loads of pockets. I'm impressed with it. This is the Bearskin tactical hoodie.
Thousands of men around the world already love wearing the bearskin hoodie instead of their regular hoodies. Why? Because sure, your average hoodie provides decent insulation to keep you warm. But as soon as you go outside, the wind blows, the rain pours, and you get cold. That's why we designed the new and improved Bearskin Hoodie 4.0 with improved windsolation technology on the waist, arms, and hood. Plus, now you can attach the new heavy storm rain jacket to the inside of the hoodie for an instant waterproof layer that blocks.
That's not American. That's not what we are about. And we're going to do right by every single person in our cities.
Well, that's the latest figures that have been released.
$200 million fraud that was feeding our future. This is leaked audio from 2021.
Just getting the question, just getting the inquiry from the AG is sometimes enough to make people knock it off.
And the people on the other end of that conversation, they appear to be offering Ellison something in return.
And we are willing to put our money where our mouths are in that sense, helping elected officials that are interested in protecting communities of color specifically.
Now, Somalia is ranked among the most corrupt countries in the world. It has a score of 9 out of 100, 0 being the most corrupt. And the number of Somali immigrants in the U.S. is rising from a population of 2,500 in the 90s to 145,000 in 2015, a decade ago. Who knows what the number is today, but temporary protected status for Somalis has been extended 27 times. So where are the Somalis living in the United States? Well, here are your top 3 states: Minnesota, Ohio, and Washington. Number 10, you can see on that list, is Maine. And one of our viewers brought this to our attention. Kudzu Moose writes in, Will, in Maine, there is a large Somali community near the Lewiston area. That's sort of a rough area with a lot of drugs. I'm not saying that they are involved in that, but Lewiston has a reputation. Maybe some of your Maine people can give you more information. Let's do that. Let's seek more information. Joining me now is Editor-in-Chief of the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson. Steve, it's great to have you on the program. I know that you've done a lot of reporting on this. Is it true? What's going on in Maine?
Well, it's absolutely true, Will, that there...
Our viewer, Kudzu Moose, asked about what's happening in Maine. Thank you, Steve.
Now, let's say you have 2 families in any neighborhood, one headed by a father who is gainfully employed, paying his taxes, raising his kids right, and another family is headed by a dad who's making huge money through fraud schemes, buying expensive cars, taking his kids on lavish trips, knowing all along he's protected by powerful politicians. Now, which family do you think will soon become the example for all to follow? Well, this scenario is actually playing out right now in Minnesota, where too many have concluded that crime does indeed pay, at least in the Somali community. For years, this politically powerful group, a staggering 80,000 strong, has had liberals like Governor Tim Walz and Twin Cities mayors in their back pockets. And now they've concluded, yeah, they're above the law.
Walz he should be ashamed. That beautiful land, that beautiful state, it's a hellhole right now. And the Somalians should be out of here. They've destroyed our country. And all they do is complain, complain, complain.
Well, thanks to the City Journal, Americans and President Trump were made aware of a decade-long string of Somali fraud schemes that ended up stealing billions of taxpayer dollars by exploiting Minnesota's very generous welfare state, where the culprits here inoculated themselves from scrutiny by crying discrimination at every turn. You know how it goes. Well, it took long enough, but prosecutors finally started bringing the culprits down.
We've got 78 people that have been arrested pursuant to our investigation along with the interagency, and that investigation is very much ongoing. We are not finished. It was one of the largest fraud scams ever committed in the state of Minnesota history, and we are going to continue to interview and subpoena anyone involved with this case.
And now the state is getting a thorough review also by the Treasury Department, which announced it was launching its own investigation, including the claims that millions of the taxpayers' dollars were funneled to that Islamic terror group, Al-Shabaab. And on top of that, House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer just announced his own investigation. Now, this is all long overdue, but naturally, Democrats like Mayor Jacob Frey ignore the opportunity to clean up the crime and instead attack Trump and then pander to the Somalis.
We need to also be demanding better from an administration who is intent on targeting people and
afraid of damaging their everyone's welcome here narrative. But it's not just the left that's responsible here. So are the media. They were complicit in their aggressive lack of curiosity on what's been happening. Undoubtedly, they're afraid of damaging their everyone's welcome here narrative on the third world refugees. But this week, the New York Times was finally shamed into running this piece: how fraud swamped Minnesota's social services system on Tim Walz's watch. Now, it quoted a professor, Ahmed Samatar, who's described as a leading expert in Somali studies. And he noted that Somali refugees who came here after that country's civil war were raised in a culture where stealing from a dysfunctional and corrupt government was widespread.
I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks. We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage.
This robotic puppy looks so real, it completely fooled my neighbor who's a veterinarian. I've been a
Well, I'm not wild about the garbage comment. Remember when Biden called Trump's constituents garbage? We weren't too happy about that. But look, the blowback from the local politicians against the administration, I mean, the fraud was rampant, but their blowback against Trump, well, that's predictable here.
No human being is garbage. And that kind of language is dangerous.
Shut up, man. Shut up. Your people that you associate yourself with committed $1 billion in fraud over the past 6 years. Don't get on this daggone television talking no bull crap. You need to stick to the topic. If I'm an angry American because U.S. tax dollars went to bullshit, I have every right to be angry, and I have every right to say what's on my mind. Look, your people stole from the U.S. allegedly. So don't get on this damn program on some bullshit. You trying to spin it to make sure Donald Trump is smeared in all this. Now, the president really has no place, or if I was the president, I wouldn't have said what he said. But look, I'm not President Trump, so I'm a different person, but I am upset about this. The people who were in charge of the scam are garbage. Not all Somalis are garbage. The people who wake up in the morning knowing that they gonna fraud somebody, those mugs are garbage.